and welcome to the video. This is a very quick tip, and I mean quick. It's like a tiny tip, and all it is about sewing with a double thread and how to do it without getting it knotted, because it's just a pain if you're sewing and at virtually every stitch the thread gets tangled and knotted and twisted, and it's annoying. And this is something that I didn't know when I first started making curtains. If you do know, then feel free to, move along. A lot of people ask me what thread I use. I thought it's a funny question to ask this because there's only so many threads, and I'm not that particular about what thread I use. I'll go through them in a minute, but the reason people were asking me was more because they were finding when they were sewing with a double thread that they were twisting, so they assumed that it was the thread itself that was the problem. And whilst, yeah, there are crappy threads and you don't want to get mixed up with those, most standard ones, especially ones you'll buy from workroom suppliers, will be a reasonable quality. Like this is a Coates, good brand, 100% polyester thread, just a standard machine thread, and I use this on everything. I use it on my standard flatbed machine, I use it on my overlocker. I have another type here, that's Aura. And I always have a box full in stock. And this is a 120 weight, which is a standard weight, 100% polyester. I also have in stock, and I've had for years, loads of different colours of a thicker thread. This is a 75 weight for just slightly heavier duty jobs, or if I want the thread to show, for instance, or I'm machining something more heavy duty like a PVC or I don't know, some leather or something, I would perhaps use a 75's weight. And I've got a box full of lots of different cones, different colours of these, so they're really handy, but I don't use them a huge amount, I'll be honest. And then up there I've got on my shelf a couple of odd bits and pieces. The green spool and the two behind it, the really strong nylon threads, and I use those for things like buttoning and when I need to do like a French mattress edge or something that needs a really strong thread that I just don't want to break. I'll use it for that, and all sorts of odd bits and bobs. I've got a translucent thread that I use very occasionally. I had a spate of trying to use it more on standard when I was making lots of blinds, but it's not very nice really to use on a permanent basis. But for things like a sheer, a really translucent sheer, it can be really handy on that, where a standard thread might still show. Sometimes a translucent thread, hard to get the tension right, but if you do, it's worth it. So I always have that in. And then of course I have, as does everybody, I have lots of these Gutterman, different colours. I tend to use these on the bottom of the machine, on the spool, for if I'm doing a heading tape and I want to match the fabric colour. I tend to use them mostly for that. So that's my threads. And then needle wise, I'm much more particular about my needles. It took me a long time to find these, but I finally settled on these long darners from, I can never remember the name. I always want to say John Deere, but I know they make tractors, so no, it's not right. Not John Innes, they make compost. It's John something, I'll have to look. John James long darners number 5. In fact, I loved them so much I bought 1,000 of them, and I'll never use 1,000 needles but I can't bear to not have them. It's just mad, isn't it? Anyway, they do get lost and broken, and the tip I'm going to give you now actually is so simple, but just one that I just wish I'd known when I first started sewing, and it took me a couple of years before I found out. So I struggled on. Now when you're sewing with a double thread, which you tend to do for normal slip stitching, or some people don't, some people use a thicker single thread for sewing, but I just find this is just a bit more, something a bit more malleable about it. It's a bit more forgiving, and if one thread breaks, you've always got the other one to back it up. That's my theory anyway. But anyway, the standard method: break a length off, thread one end through a needle, oops, I'm going to cut a short bit by surprise, knot the two ends together, and sew. Now, nothing wrong with that, you'd think? You arse, f***ing arse. So we'll just sew a few stitches with this double thread as normal, and straight away I can feel, see already, I've got a twist at the bottom there, and I can feel it as I sew that it's not, the threads aren't running through evenly. I'm getting unevenness at the bottom, so I'm having to keep correcting it, and that's because the thread's running up through the eye and back down again, and so you've got to keep these two lengths of thread exactly the same length and stop it from slipping through like that. Now you do get used to it, you find ways of being able to hold that and stop it from doing that, but it's awkward and you can't do it all the time, and eventually what happens is you start to get more and more knots. See there, it's not there, there's an extra little loose loop, so you find you have to keep messing with it, and what happens is as you sew, the twist of the thread, obviously there's a natural twist in the thread itself, but as you sew, you push that twist somewhat up the length of the thread as it's pulling it through the fabric. Now it's got nowhere to go, it goes up the thread, back down the other side, and this starts to twist together, you'll notice, like that, and eventually this gets so twisted that it twists on itself, and that's what causes really bad knots. So I find it frustrating. There we go, another loop. And of course the other thing as well is you can't alter the length of this bit here, so if you're sewing lots of hand sewing, you want to start off with a really long thread, so you're not constantly stopping and starting with a new thread, so you end up with a really long, and you got to sort of pull it through twice, but with the other method you don't have to do that. So I'll just show you quickly. I'll start with a new thread, and what I do is, for normal hand sewing, I will measure out sort of 3 pulls, if you like. That's my sort of length of thread that I can pull. 2, 3, and then I fold it in half so that the two ends are together, and I thread both ends through the needle like that. So it's like a single thread, basically. You treat it like a single thread, and immediately you realise that, oh, I can pull this all the way down, so I can get myself a reasonable length to work with, so I'm not dragging through great long lengths of thread, and that makes your sewing quicker because you're not drawing as far. And you also get a very handy little loop at the end, and that makes it much easier for starting, so for casting on, if you like. So I shall show you what I mean. So normally you would have a knot, or you would start under here something, and you'd do a few stitches over and over to get a good anchor. But with this you can just catch the fold at the edge, pull it through, and then loop your needle through the loop and pull, and you're ready to go. Really neat as well. And immediately I can feel this thread's better, it's smoother, there's no little catches as I'm stitching. And as I move along I can lengthen this out. I'm not having to fight to keep the two threads even because they're through the needle that way, so they're held much more securely. But the most important point to this is that the threads aren't twisting. Any twist that you sort of create and push up the thread has somewhere to go. It can come out through the eye here and then just dissipate at the end of the thread. So it's a much better, less stressful way of sewing. So we can just keep going, and obviously at some point you're going to have to stop, break off and cut the threads, and then when I do that I've got a cut end now rather than the loop. I just put a little knot in it, and then instead of starting right on the fold, just through the lining, it's top layer of lining, and I come out on the fold and then I pull it so that the thread disappears into the lining but not completely out the other side. Then I just do a little catch in the edge of the lining, pull it so it's almost sewn a stitch. And the reason I do that, I pull all the thread through first, is if you loop it higher up and then pull it down, if you've got any twist in this thread you've got to sort of fight your way down that. That cannot. So make it easier on yourself and wait and pull the thread through first. There we go. And yet again you've got a really nice neat start. And off we go. It's the simple things in life, but all these little extra tips sort of just help, make life a bit easier, faster. So I hope that helps. Happy sewing. Thank you, goodbye.